welcome to the 287th session of Legal Empowerment Through Interaction Lecture Series. A very important topic, that is gender and loss, is what we are having today. And the speaker for the day is a wonderful speaker, Niharika. Welcome. And to introduce the subject, we have none other than our family member, Justice Roshan Dalvi, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. And we are privileged with the presence of Justice Ramkumar, sir, Justice Ramakrishnan, sir, Justice Shalini Falsagar, ma'am, and all of you wonderful participants in this journey of interaction, empowerment, and enlightenment. So without wasting any time, may I just request Roshan Dalvi, ma'am, to render the introductory remarks. Please, ma'am, over to you.
Good evening, friends. This is a very vast topic, and it deals with half our population. It is quite often misunderstood and very often not understood. Now, this topic, friends, has socio-legal perspectives. That is what I have written about in my book also, but that is different. Now, it must have the understanding of how the history of these gender laws had begun. And this history, friends, we had studied. Some of us are here in Warwick University in England. And Hema, Niharika's mother, I call her Hema because she is my friend, she's Justice Hema, was one of them. I generally don't like to speak about anyone being a daughter of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, wife of so-and-so, etc. But in case of Niharika, I must mention that she is a worthy daughter of a good mother. Because this is the proof of the pudding, that Hema must have given her such upbringing as we would want everyone in our country to give to their children. And today, she is on a platform to make us understand what she thinks is law. That said, now what about the law, friends? As I told you, it has a long history. This law is, I would say, divided into two parts: protection and empowerment. There are several laws for protection of women who cannot take, you can say, who cannot stand by themselves. And there are several laws for empowering women to come easily on top. And today, this is known from the acronym DIE: Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. By this gender inclusion and gender equity, we get diversity. And with that diversity, we have gender justice. So you see, friends, this is power balancing. It is not pandering to someone, and it is not also throwing off someone. So we take them as a part of our society. And this, friends, in our laws have been there since at least 1860. Because if you know the IPC, you know that there are so many provisions really for women, though gender was not a fashionable term at that time. So there are various sections in the IPC dealing with gender, which deals in, of course, criminal law. So for gender equality, we had, after the IPC, several reformist movements of Indians as well as Britishers, and several laws which were not there, or which were there in our society, which dealt very inequitably with women, like, for example, Devdas's, Sati, etc., etc. They were sought to be restricted or prevented. This happened well before our constitution. For example, the Child Marriage Restraint Act was of 1929, exactly 20 years before our constitution. The procedural codes also have certain aspects of gender, both the Criminal Procedure Code and the Civil Procedure Code. And then came our constitution. That constitution is the bedrock of gender justice in our country today. It is the foundation on which laws in favor of women and children have been enacted under Article 15, and also the directive principles of state policy under Articles 39, 42, and 45. The right to equality also is essentially gender law, I would say, because earlier the girls were not given education and only the boys were given, and the girls did work at home. After the constitution, and because of our constitution, we had a host of personal laws, beginning with the Special Marriage Act and going on to the Hindu Code, consisting of the Hindu Marriage Act, the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act, Guardian Divorce Act, Succession Act, etc. Then came the physical and sexual laws. They dealt with various offenses against women. This was the ITPA, the POXO, the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, and such other laws. Together with that, and on the civil side, for empowerment of women, we have a host of employment laws. The Equal Remuneration Act, Equal Protection Act, etc., etc. And there are many such laws. I don't want to give a lecture on gender laws, that Niharika will do. Aside from that, the family laws also deal with only gender, the Family Courts Act. And on the extreme right of the spectrum are military laws. Essentially, otherwise, earlier, completely paternalistic, completely masculine. And now they have got women everywhere, including in the commissions and the permanent commissions also. So this is, friends, our history of gender laws, which of course Niharika will explain. More than that are the subordinate legislations. There are several of them through various notifications, etc. Like, for example, women have to pay 1% less stamp duty, and women don't have to pay any court fees act if it is for maintenance, and all of those kind of things. Then there are some latent subordinate legislations. Like, for example, you cannot have more than 3 children if you are a government servant and if you want a government accommodation. Now, this is a very gender positive law because it actually helps in the health care of women. That men don't have as many children as they might want, but are satisfied with 1 or 2. After this, friends, there is a lot of precedent law, which also I don't want to go into, and which Niharika, I'm sure, will. So, having given you the vast history, right from IPC to today's diversity and inclusion, which is now in our statutes, something like even the Companies Act, I give the floor to Niharika, and I'm sure she'll do well. All the best, Niharika, and we are waiting to hear you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you for the introductory remarks. We recognize the presence of Justice Manju Goyal and Justice Basant sir. Thank you for joining. And Niharika, the stage is set for you.
Thank you so much, sir. So I want to today, good evening, everyone, first of all, and then thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'm really glad to be here today. Now, coming straight into the topic. So one of the things that I thought when I thought about this topic, gender in law, is that gender is a term that's been constantly evolving lately. So I wanted to start off this conversation with everyone on the basis of that. So when we hear the word gender and gender justice, we tend to think of women, and we tend to think of women's justice. So this is the aspect that I would like to deal with. I want to first talk about biological sex, and then I want to come to gender, because this is a difference that is commonly not known to a lot of people, and I believe it is also a thing which most of us would know. But I feel that when this lecture goes on the internet, this would be useful for other persons who may not be aware of this type of difference. So I would start off with that. So let's look at what biological sex is. So we're aware of what biological sex is from our basic biology lessons. We tend to look at a few aspects to determine the biological sex. Sorry, sir? Yes, sir. So let's look at what biological sex is. So when we think of sex, we think of male and female. And then we think of, what else do we think of? We think of chromosomes. We know that there's XX chromosomes and we think there's XY chromosomes. And then we also look at anatomy and genitals and all these aspects to come up with determining the sex of a person. And based on that, when somebody is born, they're assigned a sex. So you look at a child, you look at a baby, and then you determine whether it is male or female. And then you say he or she. So this is a male child and this is a female child. But gender is a more nuanced concept than that at the moment. So in the beginning, in the very beginning, sex and gender were thought to be same terms. In most of our articles, in most of the academic community, or anything that we're exposed to, we tended to see sex and gender to be the same thing. But that's evolved now. So I'll come to that. So sex is what I described it is, and now gender. So gender is a social construct. It is what we think of as man and woman. For example, when we think of gender, in the beginning at least, that's evolved now. But we tend to think of it in binary. That is a gender binary, and we think man and woman. And we tend to attribute certain aspects to what a man is, or what manhood is, or what feminine is, what womanhood is, and so on. And when we tend to do that, there are certain gender roles that get assigned on the basis of gender. So let's say we attribute certain qualities to men and certain other qualities to women. And this has happened over thousands of years, that later when law came about, and as we all know, laws initially were just a set of rules. And over time, there came state, there came like the command of the sovereign, and law became statute. Some of it became customary law and all of that. I'm not going to the evolution of law as such, but law began to understand gender in a binary sort of a scenario. And almost all of our laws stand in that binary. And this is where there was a recognition of transgender with the Nalsa judgment. So once that happened in the Nalsa judgment, there came Transgender Protection Act. And before there was Transgender Protection Act, there were transgender policies. And Kerala was one of the first, I believe, to have that type of a policy. So now we understand that gender is still even more nuanced, and so is sex. So sex is not just male and female. Sex can also be intersex. So that is on the basis of the same chromosomes and the same anatomy, the same genitals, and all of these aspects that we use to determine male and female. There is another category called intersex. And an intersex person is a person with a variation in these types of um, factors that we use to determine sex. So they might have a chromosomal differences, which is traditionally only attributed to male and female. So, XX and XY, but they might have a combination. And they might, their genitals may be, again, a combination. And they might have a certain internal structure and a certain different external structure. So then there's male, female, and intersex based on sex. But in terms of gender, there's men, women, transgender. This is the most common. But there are also other genders that are seen to be evolving lately, such as genderqueer or gender fluid and so on. So this concept is a constantly evolving thing, especially in the West, with a lot of laws, with a lot of rules, and a lot of confusion applying. Now we come to gender justice in the sense it stands today. So I would restrict this conversation to criminal law, because that is what I'm most comfortable with. And Sim Ramkumar sir makes me really happy, because I believe that there will be a lot of contribution when I really come into that aspect. So let's start with the IPC, given the fact that the IPC would only be alive for a little bit more. But still, since it forms the base to BNSS as well, let's start with that. Now, when you look at the Indian Penal Code, it's Section 10 that talks about man and woman. There is a definition in sex and gender. I'm sorry, there's a definition in Section 10. So I will just quickly go to Section 10 to read out what a man and a woman is under the Indian Penal Code. So it says that the word man denotes a male human being of any age, and the word woman denotes a female human being of any age. So we can understand that the Indian Penal Code stands in a manner that it works out of a gender binary. It believes that man is male and woman female, and that's that. And there are lots of provisions in the Indian Penal Code which only becomes an offense when it is committed by a man against a woman. So which means it only becomes an offense when a male commits it against a female. So I will talk about that and the confusions it creates in the more nuanced gender uh, situation that we have now. So talking about this, let's look at something like 376. And okay, before I come to this, I also want to use the Transgender Protection Act to talk about what a transgender is under the Transgender Protection Act. So under the Transgender Protection Act, we have a very specific definition for who a transgender person is. So going to that, I will just read out that particular aspect also, so that I can have that clear before I move on. So herein, a transgender person means a person whose gender does not match with the gender assigned to that person at birth. So it specifically says gender does not match with the gender assigned to that person at birth and includes trans man or trans woman, whether or not such a person has undergone sex reassignment surgery or hormone therapy or laser therapy or such other therapy. It also includes persons with intersex variations, gender and persons having such socio-cultural identities as Skinner, Hijra, Aravani, and Jogta. So all these persons come under the concept of transgender persons, and in effect, after the Nalsa judgment, gender is something that a person can determine for themselves. There is self-determination of gender in India today. So now, when we keep this in our mind and we come back to the IPC, we would expect gender justice. And by this, I mean that there is justice for all genders, a man, woman, transgender, or any other gender there is. Basically, there should be justice for all categories, all kinds of people. And when it comes to the Constitution, the Article 15, Clause 3 would permit us to create special laws for women and children, which is why, like ma'am pointed out, that we have so many laws under various statutes protecting the interests of women. So there are various statutory provisions within the Indian Penal Code as well that protects the interest of women. And while that is so, we have to also now consider where other genders stand in terms of gender justice. I believe that is the new aspect that I'm trying to bring to the table today. So when we look at that and we go back to this provision, so we look at all the laws that are there for women, special laws and special provisions. So under the Indian Penal Code, we certainly have rape, which is a very grievous offense and which only becomes an offense when it is committed on a female by a male. And there are certain provisions on kidnapping and abduction for different purposes, which again pertains specifically to women or females. There's also cases of dowry death attempts or offenses under 498A. There's molestation under 354 IPC. There's sexual harassment under 509. There is also 496, 494, 366. All of these offenses which revolve around females or women. And apart from this, we also have special laws, that is Immoral Traffic Prevention Act and Dowry Prohibition Act or Indecent Representation of Women Prohibition Act, Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, and all of this. We have all these different laws to protect women. And this is all passed with a view to bring about gender justice. And now we know that these laws were brought up to cover for women who suffered for generations owing to patriarchy. And that is where gender becomes so important to law, because law is largely based on certain notions that we believe are correct or required to maintain uh, a smooth functioning society. It is to prevent crime, whether it is to prevent atrocities, it is also to regulate various institutions like marriage, adoption, or let's say even companies and all kinds of things. Law is there to make sure that we are living in a civilized society. So law, as we understand, at least in India, it is important for law to be impartial or showing positive discrimination in a way to make things equal for everyone. So this is where I want to point out that law may not be equal, particularly criminal law may not be equal for all genders uh, the way it stands today, and how other genders might need specific protections to ensure that their human rights and their fundamental rights are not violated. Let's start off with the with 376 rape. So for that, let me just go back to the definition portion of it, that is section 375. So under section 375, which was amended after the incident, after the Criminal Law Amendment Act came in, after the very infamous and painful rape case had happened in New Delhi. So under this, it says that a man is said to commit rape. So we understand that rape is an offense which can only be committed by a man, that is a biological male, if he does a series of things. And all of these aspects from A to D talks about women. Now, women, as IPC understands, would be a biological woman. So then my question would be, when there is provision for change in gender under the Transgender Protection Act. Section 7 deals with that. Therein it says, after the issue of a certificate under a subsection 1 of section 6, if a transgender person undergoes surgery to change gender, either as a male or female. So they're talking about gender there, change gender, either male or female. However, section 10 is very specific in the IPC. It talks about sex. It does not talk about change of gender. It talks specifically of change of sex. So sex, it's a debatable thing whether it is changeable or not, because sex is determined on the basis of a series of things, including chromosomes, including anatomy, interior and internal and external, and lots of other such factors. So can we essentially say that with a gender reassignment surgery, or a gender affirming surgery, as it is more politely called today, or terms again keep evolving. So Section 7 of the Transgender Protection Act contemplates a change in gender, not so much a change in biological sex. So let's say that a person who is a transgender person undergoes surgery to change their gender, either as male or female. Let's say that somebody changes it as female. Would they still be termed as female in terms of their biological sex? Because here they're talking about a change in gender. Now, if that happens, let's say somebody undergoes a bottom surgery, as it is called, and reconstructs a vagina. Let's look at that scenario. So if we go strictly by the interpretation, where does that leave us? Because it is clearly not explained under the law whether a transgender woman who under section 10 would be treated as a man still, because maybe treated as a man still because biologically male, because they're talking only about a change in gender, not a change in sex. What happens when she has the anatomy of a biologically female person from externally, and even has an artificially, even has a surgically created vagina? What happens when she is raped by somebody who has the male anatomy? Would that be, wouldn't that be unfair if it is proceeded with in a manner that she is not, as a trans woman, may not be treated as a woman under the IPC? So shouldn't there be clarifications to these types of things? Now let's come back and say, okay, some persons might say that there are offenses under the Transgender Protection Act which would cover for the transgender persons and their sex abuse problems. Now, when we come to that, we will understand that yes. So I thought somebody was saying something. Is that? Am I
No,
audible?
you can. Yeah, you are audible. Carry on.
Okay. So when we look at offenses and penalties under Section 18 of the Transgender Protection Act, we would see that the punishment is very little. It says harms or injures, or this is the final clause that I'm reading out. So it's whoever, subclause D, 18 subclause D would say, harms or injures or endangers the life, safety, health or well-being, whether mental or physical, of a transgender person, or tends to do acts including causing physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal and emotional abuse, and economic abuse, shall be punishable with imprisonment for a term which shall not be less than 6 months, but which may extend to 2 years and with fine. But this is opposed to a more stringent punishment under Section 376. So then we can ask, I mean, under Section 376, there are various degrees of punishment, but which is certainly very, very serious and can lead up to imprisonment for life even, or even the remainder of that person's natural life even under a certain subsection. So when this happens, can we say that the trauma undergone by a trans woman would be different from a woman? Or they face the same issues that a biological female would face, because they would still have the chances of acquiring an STD, or they would still face the physical trauma of the assault and all of it. So would it be fair to say that there is that differentiation when it comes to this particular provision? Now we come back to 377, and some people would say that 377 is there to protect against such issues. Now, when we look at 377, it does not talk about consent at all. And only the Supreme Court with Navtej Singh Johar only decriminalized consensual homosexual activity between adults, between consenting adults. However, Section 377 talks about a carnal intercourse rather, voluntarily. So it says, whoever voluntarily has carnal intercourse against the order of nature with any man, woman, or animal shall be punished with imprisonment for life, or with imprisonment for either description of a term which may extend to 10 years and shall also be liable to fine. And it also says penetration is sufficient to constitute carnal intercourse necessary to the offense described in this section. So let's say for a second that 377 comes in that particular scenario. But the question is, here there is no aspect of consent. It only talks about voluntarily having carnal intercourse against the order of nature. So again, it becomes quite tricky the way we deal with a scenario like this. So this is with regard to 376. Now we look at sections 354 to 354D under the Indian Penal Code. So these are also offenses which only, I mean, acts which only become offenses when it is committed by a man against a woman. So let's get to that. That is section 354 onwards, 354 to 354D. So when we come to that, we understand that 354 is assault or criminal force to woman with intent to outrage her modesty. So we understand that 15 clause 3 of the Constitution certainly permitted us to have special laws and special provisions to protect women. But there is an inherent understanding that a woman has modesty, and which when becomes outraged, or when somebody causes it to be causes to outrage somebody's modesty by assault or criminal force with an intention and all of that under 354, are we presuming that only biologically female women would have modesty? That's another aspect to think about. Similarly, sexual harassment and punishment for sexual harassment. Again, only those acts which are committed by a man, that is a biological male, committing it against a woman, would become an offense under 354A. So what happens when there is somebody who's got a different biological makeup, or is uh, going through everything that a woman would probably go through in the social sense, because they tend to think or perceive themselves as a woman, or determine themselves as a woman, and we know are susceptible to all those acts. We do understand there is a lot of objectification of transgender persons. There are persons who are getting harassed and they are being sexually abused, which is the reason why there is a protection under Transgender Protection Act. But let's look at the difference in punishment. Herein, it says either description of a term which may extend to 1 year or with fine or with both. But when it's a transgender person, there is a little bit more. There is 6 months to 2 years. So then are we saying that somehow sexually harassing a woman is lesser than sexually harassing a transgender person? So all these types of things do happen. Now, assault or use of criminal force to women with intent to disrobe. Let's again talk about disrobing a woman. We understand that there have been instances of women being disrobed in public historically, to insult them, to take away their honor with the way it is perceived. As in, there is an inherent perception that when a woman is disrobed in public, there is um, a lack, I mean, or rather an injury to her honor. I mean, politically correct or not, but there is a presumption like that which gives rise to, not a presumption, I mean, there is a understanding like that which gives rise to a provision like 354B. So then we talk about, what about disrobing somebody else, a man or a transgender person? Wouldn't they feel the same embarrassment? Wouldn't they still go through the same emotional trauma? Then why not? Similarly, 354C voyeurism. Again, there are leading cases. There have been lots of cases on the media that we see where there have been instances of women um, observing men as well in a manner that makes them uncomfortable. So my primary question when it comes to 354C is it really true to say that voyeurism can only occur by a man against a woman? I certainly believe that may not be the case, because we certainly see peeping toms around the world taking cameras and watching all kinds of persons irrespective of their sex or gender. And I feel this one particular provision should be applicable for all genders, all persons irrespective of their gender or sex, because this is a very serious offense which is commonly committed these days. So it says, any man who watches or captures the image of a woman engaging in a private act in circumstances where she would usually have the expectation of not being observed, either by the perpetrator or by any other person as the behest of the perpetrator, or disseminates such image, shall be punished on first conviction with imprisonment of either description for a term which shall not be less than 1 year, but which may extend to 3 years, and shall also be liable to fine. And thereafter it goes on like that. And private act includes an act of watching carried out in which a person in the circumstances would reasonably be expected to provide privacy, and where the victim's genitals, posterior or breasts were exposed or covered only in underwear, or the victim is using a lavatory, or the victim is doing a sexual act that is not of a kind ordinarily done in public. So now, in my perception at least, this provision should be applicable to all, because we all know that privacy is now understood to be a part of all of our lives, irrespective of gender. Privacy is a right, a valuable right, which is available with all genders, all persons, all citizens. So when that be the case, should 354C really be limited to just one gender? Because it is not, I would say that it should not be, because I believe that privacy applies to everyone equally, and all these provisions that I just mentioned, all these things can be done by other genders also, where they expect a reasonable degree of privacy, and when that is being violated, it should be a criminal offense. Similarly, stalking, we see a lot of cases lately on the media wherein men are being followed by women. There are transgender persons who are being followed by other genders, and so on. There's all kinds of conversations going on Instagram, on Facebook, where you get a lot of unsolicited messages from different persons. So why should that again be attributed only to one gender? So this is again another concept of talking about gender justice in terms of sections 354 to 354D. Now, there is also another provision that talks about minor girls. So this is in terms of procuration of a minor girl. It's under 366A. It says, whoever by any means whatsoever induces any minor girl under the age of 18 years to go from any place or to do any act with the intent that such girl may be, or knowing that it is likely she will be forced or seduce illicit intercourse with another person, shall be punishable with imprisonment, which makes it 10 years. So when we talk about girl, the term girl is not defined in the IPC itself. But we can still defend it in a way saying that there is POXO Act, which provides protection to children across genders and sexes. It does not matter what they come under, as long as they're a person below the age of 18 years, get a lot of covered protection from all kinds of illegal sexual offenses. So that is another part of the spectrum that I was just talking about. Now, there are lots of other issues as well that come in, like, for example, when they say Section 366, which makes it a punishable offense to kidnap or abduct or induce a woman to compel her marriage. Now, we are aware of certain cases, especially a case that came up in the Madras High Court, wherein we were talking about the ban of conversion therapy for homosexual persons. So we also know that social pressures, again, the concept of gender and having to marry and having to found a family in the traditional sense, causes persons to be forced into marriages with persons they don't prefer to be married to, particularly since they have a different sexual orientation and so on. Why should their rights not be protected under this particular act? What if they are being kept against their will and being forced into marriages against their will? That is another aspect that I wanted to talk about when we talk about gender justice and gender in law. And another interesting area is Section 498A. Now, I'm not sure, but there was this decision that I believe most of you would have read. That is, there was a decision in the Madras High Court where they said that trans Hindu bride would be a bride. Transgender woman would be a bride under the Hindu Marriage Act. Now we know that the same-sex marriages were not permitted by the High Court, but I'm sorry, the Supreme Court. But at the same time, transgenders are still being permitted to marry. And what happens in such situations? Again, do the protections that women get under special legislations in a marriage, are they available to transgender women as well? Now, if that is done, would that be in the best interest of everyone? So that is another question. Now, similarly, we can talk about transgender and their right to access competitive sports. There's a lot of controversy going on in terms of their physiological differences and advantages that they may have. There is conflicting reports, conflicting researchers around the world saying that they do have a genetic advantage or a physiological advantage over a biological female because of the way they progressed after puberty and so on. There is also research that says there's no considerable difference and so on. But then what happens to situations like access to locker rooms and so on? Uh, we may be aware of this swimmer, Leah, in the US, who was a competitive swimmer, and a lot of women had come forth and said that, I mean, a lot of biological females had come forth saying that they were uncomfortable changing in front of a transgender woman and so on. So this was, I believe, the case was that the transgender woman in that particular competitive sport of swimming retained her male uh, genitals. So then, where do we draw the line? Do we talk about women being comfortable? Do we talk about women's spaces? Do we talk about transgender spaces? Are they same? Should they be same? And so on. So, legislature has a long way to go in terms of navigating various genders, various sexes, uh, and how to deal with all of them. And this is the real area that I wanted to talk about today, as gender is a nuanced concept. So I brought forth a few aspects that came to my mind, and then I believe at this point we can all sit together and have a discussion on these areas so that we can all have more clarity. Thank you.
For opening up the topic and for also giving a good in-depth analysis of the different nuances and different aspects. Thank you very much. And may I just have the comments of Mrs. Ramkumar.
Who am I to make a comment on this? That I
Sir,
am
you're an expert, sir.
not at all. I am concentrating on some procedural aspects of criminal law. That's all. Now, gender inequality, gender bias, gender prejudice, the need for empowerment of women, as soon all may have to be redefined. As soon as a child is born, we the parents or the hospital staff announce it's a boy or it's a girl, unmindful of the offense the person is committing against the rights of the child. It may have to be considered. See, a child who is really not a boy or a girl is called a boy or a girl, unmindful of the rights of the child. Likewise, after the discovery of gender, this gender other than man and woman, our criminal laws also may require redefined, may have to be redefined. The disparity in the punishment, as you pointed out correctly, under the IPC and the Transgender Protection Act, may not stand the test of time. It may not be far off when the legislature comes out with a definition of rape, wherein a man can be raped by a woman. Of course, I don't call it man or woman, but those days are not far off. If procreation of children is not an essential attribute of the institution of marriage, I don't know where we are heading to. At least on the civil side of the picture, we may have. I don't know whether among human beings there are hermaphrodites. I don't know. Well, all those things may have to be considered. Wonderful introduction, wonderful articulation, Niharika.
Thank you so much,
Good
sir.
lecture.
Roshan, Dalvi,
Yes.
for your comments.
Oh, I gave the introduction and now I have to give the conclusion. Yes. When I gave the introduction essentially between men and women, that gender is. But now that we have heard about transgender, you see, I know about there are certain provisions and certain precedents even relating to transgender. A very interesting example, for example, is that there was a transgender person who applied to be a woman for the purposes of election, and he said that I have changed my gender, and the court held that once he changes the gender and becomes she and stands for election in a particular kind of a role, he will not be able to re-change the gender thereafter, and took an undertaking from him. So those kind of very interesting cases would be coming up in gender and transgender. One aspect of transgender that I might want to tell you about is that we know that several women suffer from certain kinds of violence. Transgender women suffer from peculiar kind of violence, which is even more. And in America, research has shown that black women suffer even more than white women, and black transgender women suffer still more. So those are the areas which will require empowerment once we accept them in our society. And then once they are empowered to an extent, there should be thereafter equity and equality with them on the civil side of the spectrum, where they would be getting, let us say, all kinds of admissions to educational institutions or even in employment. Okay. So I think I would rest at that. Those are various aspects.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Now, I request Justice Shalini.
Yes, Niharika,
Speak a
it
few
was
words.
really enlightening to hear you. When Roshan said gender and laws, I was under impression like her that it would be relating to women. But I am happy that you dealt with this subject of transgender, which is really emerging and a matter of concern. I mean, we are still not having the basic facilities for them, even like washrooms at public places, restrooms, where they are to go. And in that context, some reservations like Karnataka High Court, Karnataka government has made 1%, reservation for this transgender. Similar other states are also adopting that pattern. So little awareness will grow up. But till now, we are at a very, very, preliminary stage so far as transgender are concerned. And this awareness is utmost necessary. I'm happy that you chose this subject. And
Thank
you
you.
have dealt with it in detail, like in criminal perspectives, IPC provisions. So good to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Very well done.
Yeah, very
Very
well done.
Very
We
well.
are happy.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Now we have Ramesh sir. Ramesh sir.
Really, it's a thought-provoking speech by Niharika.
Thank you so
I
much, sir.
really, it's a new area where the legislation will have to come to protect them. Because even in the latest decision with the Supreme Court also, when the Special Marriage Act will have to be amended,
Right.
and there also they said that it is for the legislation to do it. For taking it, the Nalsa case also, the Supreme Court said that the provisions will not be made for the purpose of protection and empowerment of transgenders, because it has become a third gender has come now. It's a third gender will not be recognized. So the question as to whether they will not be recognized or not is not in question now, because not in dispute, because they will not be recognized as being accepted now.
Yes.
On that basis only the Transgender Protection Act also came, and subsequently some employment provisions were also included, but these people will not be given the irrespective of the gender in order to avoid the gender inequality, that will have been provided. I think that Shyam himself has had a discussion on this aspect by some movement, NGO. On this aspect, they also talked about the same thing, because there are lacunas in the Transgender Protection Act as well, that will not be taken note of for the purpose, but so far nothing has been done. Even I thought that when these things were going on, when the new IPC came, that some change will be there for covering them also, but unfortunately the same man and women, all the same definition.
Transgender has been transgender is there now in terms of pronouns. Under pronouns, it said he can be used to denote transgender person.
No,
is
that
there.
is the reason why I am coming. See, if that be the case, when you have been genetically, you have been declared or your gender as a male or a female, can it not be possible for the court to interpret that whether you are a male or a female for the purpose of a particular provision?
That is a question, sir. But it
No,
first
that will have to be. That will have to be. Say, unless once the Transgender Protection Act gives the declaration as to whether what is your gender, because gender is a general name, male or female, etc., comes as a species on that. So when it comes that, when you are interpreting the provision, I don't think there is any difficulty for the courts, if on the basis of medical evidence, if it comes that she can be treated as a trans woman and a male commits rape or sexual assault on such particular person, why can't the provisions of, because the other is only a general provision, that is only giving a lesser punishment, that will not take away the IPC when such an offences can be included.
So, but the only question in such a case for me personally to talk about it is that under Transgender Protection Act, there is a provision of self-determination of gender. So a person is able to determine their own gender.
No,
So can
thereafter,
that be
madam,
called
no. Thereafter, for the purpose of court, when the medical examination is being done, the doctor can declare whether he is a trans woman or a trans this thing, based on your physical features, and also the mental features, as how your anatomy deals with that, your feelings. See, when the changes are coming up, I think the law will also need to go along with that for the purpose of finding out some provision by which those people also can be the persons who have been suffering on account of that will have to be protected.
Tests will have to be developed, sir. Tests
No,
will have to be.
no, it's a new area, because we can't say that everything for which a law must be there.
Apart from the secondary sexual characteristics, genetically also it will have to be examined.
No, whether it is possible, when the sexual intercourse will be possible between, because that is the reason why the Supreme Court also in the latest decision, when the special marriage will have to be amended, heterosexual marriages can be registered among the transgenders. Only thing is, homosexuals, we don't want to, that is for the government to decide. As far as the heterosexuals are concerned, where this type of people will come, because genetically changed or surgically changed or declaring yourself as man and woman, all those things will come under the heterosexual activities. Once your heterosexual activities are possible and that can be recognized by as a marriage, even the Madras High Court also said it is for the government to, when there is an agreement is there, you can register that agreement.
So I believe there is a specific decision wherein a trans woman was
just-
treated as a
no,
bride
just-
under the Hindu Marriage Act.
No, the
Arun Kumar.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Arun
yes,
Kumar's
sir.
case,
Yes,
Justice
yes, sir.
Swaminathan.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
they
So,
have
but the
directed because there is a
question is
notification. There is a notification issued in the Tamil Nadu government. It appears on that basis that can be registered. What they said, or some provisions have been made, some directions have been issued in that case.
But the question is, let's say when there is a marriage like that, that is registered. So would the bride or the trans woman also receive protection under aspects like maintenance or 498A and domestic violence? Would they, because they're entering into a domestic relationship, they're essentially entering into a marriage. So when they're still transgender person and transgender woman, and they're entering into an institution like marriage, would they get the same protections that a biological female would get? Is the
That is an
sir.
area will have to involve.
Parity of punishment also.
Yes, sir.
Those are all the areas where the government will have to, the legislature
But
will
when
have
we
to
talk about
little
that, I
more.
feel that the challenges faced by trans women would be challenges, those challenges would be different from challenges faced by women as well. So in that sense, would it even bring justice to bring the same provisions in? Because I believe that queer marriages can be very different in structure from that of a heterosexual marriage. Their understandings or how it works, all of that would be different, I believe. Because most of our marriage laws come out as a result of custom or practice and tradition and so on. So what happens to queer marriages, their family dynamics, and then can you automatically bring them to the same parallel as the woman and then give the same protections? All that are very large questions, I believe.
No, not only that, even now the recognition of such transgender or the right to choose the gender by the child is also now in a dilemma because the family people are not accepting that as such. So unless empowerment is there, awareness is there, and these people also will have to be taken care of by the society as a person, I can say that because once you say a person, female, male, transgender, everybody will come.
They are ostracized. They are ostracized.
Most of the areas it is there. Even the latest cinema also, that they don't want to disclose it. The marriage was there, that Kadal or something like that. Kadal the core by Mammootty and Jyotika. Ultimately, they ended in divorce because she later realized that he is not a male or a female, but he was a transgender. And there also the right was recognized. She fought for that only for the purpose of providing him the right to choose. That way the cinema goes ultimately, because there are areas where I do not know whether unless the society also come along with that for the purpose of recognizing them as a person to be treated with dignity, with equality. I don't think that even if a law comes, you will be treated as a separate person only. That is the difficulty, because the society must also recognize that apart from the general sexual division, there is a third gender comes up, and it is being recognized by law, and it is being recognized by certain legislations also, that they are having some certain rights which will not be protected. So the society must also develop a mindset that these people also will have to be recognized as the persons of other category as well. If such a thing has come, as far as the rape and other things are concerned, if the possibility of rape is possible by virtue of the biological what you call your biological identification or anatomical identification of the person, I think that can be extended. That is the only thing where the court can, when there is no definition, the court will have to extend the definition and find out how the justice can be done to such people. Thank you very much. You have really opened up a Pandora's box yet to be decided. Nobody can give a concrete suggestions as how this can be done, because it is for certain areas where legislature will have to come into for the purpose of protection. Probably doctor can give some explanation how this gender can be differentiated.
Before we conclude, we'll have a different perception from a gynecologist and activist for gender equality. Dr. Sankita Saxena, over to you.
Oh, that takes me by surprise, and I'm a little scared to open my mouth in front of so many judges and practitioners of law. But I do agree entirely with what Niharika was saying. And what some of the justice did point out, that when a child is born, you only have their sex. And we need to begin to understand that, change our terminology and not impose gender on our children. But having said that, lot of trans people have said that because cisgender is the majority of people are cisgender, like their sex and their gender matches, it's okay to call a female baby her and a male child him. It's okay to do that, but have conversation in the house that this is not a must and the only option. As a child grows, the child begins to understand that, yeah, there are many different genders, and it's okay to choose any, and they can, respect and have equal rights for everybody.
And I also believe there are persons who do not wish to identify as any gender as well, I believe now.
Yes. And I had a training in Mumbai about this, and they were saying that there was this child, 3-year-old, who asked this trans person in the family, "Are you a he or a she?" Because she was confused the way the person would behave, you know. So the person said, "Well, by my mind and my heart, I am a she, but my body is that of a he." So the child said, "Oh, then you are a she, because to your mind and your heart is more than one, which is the body." And so much so, yeah, so much so that she said, "Everybody call this person she. And if you don't call this person she, I won't play with you."
No.
That's what the child said.
So
Right?
innocent and
Yeah, and we also had a child that was taken up for adoption. It was a child with intersex variations, and a person in Bangalore adopted the child. But when she went to adopt the child, the people at the adoption center said, "Don't adopt the child." She said, "Why? The child is like, intersex." So this lady said, "But doesn't this child deserve love and care and affection and have a life of dignity?" She adopted the child. Then she was looking for a school where she can admit the child. Because we have female toilets have privacy. You don't know what genitals this child going into a female toilet has. But a male toilet, there is no privacy. I don't understand. Why can't we make male toilets also with privacy? Then this issue of which toilet does a trans person use or an intersex person uses goes away. Like in our homes, no? We shut the door and then that's it. So there are many issues, and I really wish that our laws would not be so gendered and everything male, female. I know historically and still women do continue to suffer a lot of bias, stereotypes, violence, and all of that. But many laws can be made agender, just like POXO, like that. A lot of the IPC can also become gender neutral.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now, as we come to the end of the 287th session, over to you, Prem.
So before that, may I just quickly add as a response to what ma'am said?
Sure, you should.
Yeah.
When we talk about gender neutrality again, there is a small worry for me. That is that historically genders have suffered differently, or they've had different privileges and different sufferings, and different concepts of honor attached to being a victim of different offenses. As we usually say now, that a victim of a serious sexual offense is no longer a victim but a survivor. And we tend to say there is no loss of honor. But traditionally, these notions are so inbuilt that we still see rape victims or rape survivors being humiliated and harassed when they are women, as opposed to men. A very common example would be to simply open up Facebook and we see an underage child. So let's say a 17-year-old boy has been sexually harassed or sexually maybe even penetrated by a woman. I mean, as in you get into penetrative sexual assault of a boy by an adult woman. And the comments below them would be extremely painful to say that, oh, the boy would have enjoyed it. But when it is a girl, it is seen differently. So I believe that the attribution of something like honor, the traditional notion of honor, attributing that to how your body is utilized sexually, or how you enjoy sex, or how you suffer from sex or a sexual offense or anything of that nature, all these things, all these cultural notions would come into play. And another thing, a curious thing, actually, that I think I've mentioned it to Premraj sir earlier, I'm not too sure, I vaguely recollect, is how is it that 17 years and 364 days, a boy or a male assigned at birth or a biological male gets protection under POCSO Act, but suddenly on the day of 18, a, a man or a biological male receives no protection whatsoever against any sexual offense or a loss of privacy. And there are also different kinds of offenses where we assume that the male is the aggressor. Now, I believe that at a certain time, historically, that was necessary. But as time is progressing, let's look at cruelty, for example. Under matrimonial law, cruelty is a ground for divorce available to both men and women. So we understand under the law that cruelty is something a man and a woman is capable of inflicting on another person or a transgender. Any person is capable of being cruel to another human being. Any human being can be cruel to another human being. So when that happens, is it only because the numbers are higher or that women biologically may not be as strong? Is that the reason why there is a special provision of 498A? So all these questions do come into mind and make me wonder, why shouldn't men be protected? Why shouldn't their privacy and their modesty be protected? Why should there be a traditional notion of a traditional notion of the male aggressor remain something that is almost set in stone? That's one question I had. Another question I had was with regard to rape on the promise of marriage. Now, when we say, now the BNSS has brought it, Bharatiya Nyaya Samhita has come up with a separate offense where somebody is tricked into a sexual intercourse on the pretext of marriage or marrying. Now, the question is, doesn't that take away from the woman her sexual autonomy and try to tell her that you are a person that is merely an object of sexuality rather than a participant? So all these are questions that have come to my mind over the course of time. And I believe that law, the way it is now, it is time for the legislature took to new ways to be more inclusive of all persons, all human beings.
You're right. Even modesty may have to be redefined.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Need
sir.
not be confined to females.
Yes, sir.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That is what we do in schools, Niharika. We go into schools and we conduct gender equity, sexuality education, and we say respect all parts of the body, respect all bodies of all genders, all people, and your honor and your shame doesn't reside in any part of the body. It comes from your behavior.
Ma'am, even with regard to sex education, like you pointed out, there is a big problem that we face because sex education normally in schools happens in an abstinence mode. People believe.
No, we don't talk like that. Like that is, yeah.
No, ma'am, no,
You're
not
right.
specifically
You're
to
right.
this, but tends to. I mean, I'm not saying that you do it, but this is a common system that I've seen. Yes, you. And then there's no conversation on STIs. And let's say we talk about sex also, sexual intercourse also. Almost all sex education is limited to heterosexual intercourse, as in the penovaginal intercourse. No other modes are discussed, which means that STIs can spread through other modes as well, which can happen between heterosexuals, homosexuals, or any person for that matter. And those aspects are not being told to young adults who would become sexually active. So then there are consequences to that as well. So where is gender justice in terms of sex education? That's another aspect altogether. Thank you.
Thank you, Niharika. And Gio, would you like to add something before I go to Prem? Gio, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Shyam. See, I'm extremely happy that the youngest speaker of this platform, my favorite junior, was rocking. She was throwing original thoughts. I'm so delighted. I'm so delighted. Congratulations, Niharika. And I'm also here. I thought I'll speak because I should appreciate and congratulate Shyam for finding out the fire in her and calling her to this platform. Well done. That's all about it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Justice Vijay, for joining. Vijay, I think he's muted.
But he may be new to sex.
No, Vijay is very much here. Yeah, correct. I think he's muted. Yeah. Can you hear us?
Yeah. You can carry on. I joined late. I was out of the house. I had to go out.
Thank you very much. And as we used to say in the last 280 or more sessions, over to you, Prem.
Well, so Vijay is not going to tell anything, a few words.
No, I joined late. It will not be.
General justice, Vijay, you can general idea about general justice can be.
You would like to avoid sex.
I didn't hear the topic at all. I was.
So, with your lordship's permission, shall I, Justice Vijay?
Please, go ahead.
Okay. So that was it was an erudite articulation, and we had a very splendid, outstanding introduction by Justice Roshan Dalvi. And insofar as this lecture was concerned, it was very well presented because it is very well structured. So it goes without saying, as a great Swami Vivekananda said, a bird cannot fly with only one wing. So as a nation, we have to march forward because we cannot leave one gender behind. And as a speaker has told you, our constitution does not use the word gender. It uses the word sex, which we see in Article 15, which we see in Article 16 and Article 325. It's not the gender which the constitution recognizes actually. And the word gender, that of course, that takes in much more wider scope than the word sex. Now, with regard to this gender justice, one of the oldest decisions I could lay my hands on was Justice V.R. Krishnayya's decision, which is a single para judgment, which is Somnath versus State of Haryana, AR 1980 Supreme Court 1226, where Justice Krishnayya refused to interfere with the conviction of a husband who murdered his wife by burning, holding that gender justice, it has a high place in the Indian criminal jurisprudence. So this is just a hardly, maybe it's less than 10 sentences judgment. Then we have a beautiful judgment by Justice Ramaswamy. That was a 3-judges bench decision in Madhu versus State of Bihar, 1996, 5 SCC 125, where the Supreme Court had observed that the Indian women, they have suffered and they are still suffering discrimination in silence, and that self-sacrifice and self-denial are their nobility and fortitude, and still they have been subjected to all iniquities, indignities, inequality and discrimination. An equally notable decision is the one in Voluntary Health Association of Punjab versus Union of India, which is 2013 volume 4, page 1, which held that it would not be an exaggeration to say that a society that does not respect its women, that cannot be treated to be civilized. Well, I do not want to go on and on. I would just conclude with what the speaker started, the definition of laws, which was given by the Constitution Bench of our Supreme Court in Narsingh Pratap Dev's case, 1964 Supreme Court 1793, that the body of rules which are laid down to determine the legal rights and obligations which are recognized by the law courts. Right now, this huge topic of gender justice, laws are still in a very, very nascent stage insofar as this topic is concerned. And it needs to get crystallized by our constitutional courts. Very well done, Amu. That is splendid.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye, Niharika.
Hi, ma'am. It was
Thank
wonderful
you.
talking to you. And thank
Yes,
you for
yes.
seeing everybody. I could not say thanks to Jopal sir earlier, because I couldn't unmute myself. But thank you so much, Jopal sir, for the kind words. Thank you so much, everyone, for the kind words. It was really encouraging. And just the other day, I was telling Ramkumar sir that that I keep asking him all these questions whenever it pops up in my mind. So for me, it was rather. I mean, I was really anxious to this session. So I'm really happy to have him here.
Wish you all the best.
Thank you
All
so
the
much.
best.
thank you everybody for a good evening well spent, and till we meet again next time, do take care and stay safe. Thank you very much.